Yes, good afternoon to you once again. My name is Dr. Uja Matthew Onoja, and I have been taking you on this course, Democratic Studies PAD 403, for quite some time now. And in it all, we have had some sessions and have had the opportunity to discuss what democracy is about, and then the characteristics of democracies and the features that are embedded in the practice of democracy as it relates to the individual, to the system, and to the processes that are inherent in the system, ranging from the issues of fundamental human rights, rule of law, separation of power, to the electoral system itself, electoral reforms, types of party systems, and a host of other very interesting topics have been discussed within the confines of what the democratic system is about. We have tried to do a subtle comparative analysis also of other forms of government that are not in tandem with democratic principles. But by virtue of the explanation of what democracy entails and the practices under democracy, we have to a considerable extent a fair knowledge that to large extent has aided our understanding of this topic. Because the topics in itself is premised on how to explain in totality the present practices under the democratic system, relating it to the earliest histories and forms and origins of democracy, to present the democratic principles and practices. I find it very surprising that each time this lecture is to hold, people are not always online in spite of messages that are sent out on a regular basis. I gave out my number in the last class that I be added to your WhatsApp group, as I am aware that other classes have their WhatsApp groups. And from there, we schedule our time for lectures, also in line with the timetable that the school management has handed to us. So I want to believe that beyond now, you would inform other members of the class that they are free time to visit the school website and listen to this lecture so that you would have a fair understanding of what we discuss in this class regularly. I'll still give out my number today in the events that you have a personal question or contribution to make, so that you can reach me either privately or through your class group. I'm open enough to be added to your group. So my number still again is 08036113243. I repeat again, 36113243. So today we shall be looking at electoral systems. However, before that, let me share my screen with you so that you would see what we will be discussing today. So, having said that, I would begin by saying the electoral system is the heart of any democratic system. For this reason, most democratic states are conscious of the imperative to put in place a good electoral system that will ensure free and fair elections. So at the end of this class, it is expected that you should be able to explain the meaning and types of electoral systems. So having said that, the definition of electoral system goes this way. All modern democratic nations in the world have evolved a system by which their citizens participate in the process of electing their leaders. It is through elections that people express their views on issues and accord legitimacy to or withdraws it from political leadership. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who popularized the doctrine of the general will, preferred direct democracy to representative government, since according to him, individuals' will could not be transferred because it is inalienable and that no one can adequately represent other individuals. If you look at this statement, then it begins by saying the electoral system in itself is the system by which people elect their leaders in a democratic system. However, just like we made a comparative analysis of what used to be in the Greek city-state to be known as democracy, where people gather to have a direct opinion, a direct view, and a direct position of the affairs of the governance of their state. And we said that due to the sophistication and complexity of modern day system, that system that took place or that used to be the practice in the Greek city-state is no longer tenable in our modern day society. However, there is a view by Ginger Grossius saying that in spite of the beauty in the electoral system, that the direct rule or the direct practice in the Greek city-state appears more better, owing to the fact that the will of an individual cannot be transferred or cannot be adequately represented when another individual is in charge or will hold sway. So as such, he is trying now to say that the Greek city-state's practice tends to reflect more the tenets of democracy and the choices that people make. But I think he ran foul of the fact that modern day society and activities cannot permit an individual or individuals to gather together in one place to practice democracy as it should be. Rather, the practice now is tilted towards representative governments. And that is where the modern day principle and practice of democracy becomes very, very important. But today, direct democracy is no longer realistic because the world has advanced beyond the Greek city-state. Therefore, what is now popularly referred to as a liberal democracy rests on the pillar of representative government, universal suffrage, and unrestricted franchise of voters' eligibility. The electoral system is a process or the machinery through which citizens in any given democratic state elect their representative in competitive elections that are held at periodic intervals. While the casting of votes is the highest point of an electoral process, other activities are involved before the process can set to be complete. An essential task of an electoral system is to provide opportunity for a broad spectrum of individuals to participate in the political process. This is very significant in any type of government, unitary or federal, but more so in the latter, because a good electoral system helps to foster national integration. Broadly, an electoral system may either be based on the majority rule or proportional representation. What this is saying is that, in spite of the system that is being practiced, the central point reflects or revolves around the processes through which leaders are elected within the system. And it is more pronounced in the federal system, where the process tends to capture an array of interests and the role of the system in electing its leaders becomes very important and very, very reasonable. So there are different types of electoral systems. And if you look at the last statement here, a comparison was made between majority rule or proportional representative. These are systems in itself that are embedded in the general electoral system as it is known. So we shall be looking at majority rule. And we have said from the name itself, you should have a fair idea, a fair understanding of what this system entails. Now we have it here that in a majority rule system, that, for example, as practiced in Nigeria, as at present, party or candidates with majority of votes cast in an election is declared the winner. But a major disadvantage of majority rule system is that a party may win a minority of votes and nevertheless command majority of seats in parliament and thus form a government, Another party may win less than half of the seats, but with disproportionately high margin of votes. This oddity of the majority rule variant of an electoral system may be tolerated where it occurs occasionally, but where it occurs more frequently, it certainly poses grave danger to the polity. Also, in a majority rule system, the minority parties that are constantly defeated at elections may either lose interest in politics or develop radical or subversive ideas. It may also encourage the fragmentation of political parties along regional or ethnic lines. This scenario is true of Nigeria politics, defunct First Republic. In the views that are expressed under this majority rule system, you would see that first, the beauty of it is in the fact that the candidate with the majority vote cast is declared winner. Then again, there's the risk of having a huge number of persons left out under this system, because those that don't or do not cast their vote in support of a particular candidate can easily be left out under this system. And that is where the issue of minority votes can sometimes have even a seat in the parliament, but might not reflect the popular will of the government, of the people. So, and there's the risk that the big political parties would always have their way, and to the detriment of the system in its entirety and other smaller parties that participate or play significant roles in the system. And that, to a large extent, can create a feeling of apathy or a feeling of a lack of involvement in the system. And there is the risk that these political parties, the small ones, can go into coalition, can even be structured along ethnic lines to create a major challenge for the sustainability of the system. So the majority rule has its challenges as well. And we went further by saying that in a single member constituency, as long as there are more than one candidate for a single seat in an election, the seats will always be distributed among political parties disproportionately to the votes cast. Two illustrative cases are relevant here. In the 1992 general election in Britain, the Conservative Party, led by John Major, secured a majority of seats in the parliament, but the party failed to win a majority of popular votes. Also, if we use a simulative scenario of an election involving three parties, and in which the distribution of votes is as follows: Party A, 41%, Party B, 39%, Party C, 29%, it is obvious that Party A with 41% has won, based on the majority rule principle. Yet, majority of voters, if you sum up the other calculations from the other political parties, would give you 59%, voted against the party that has won with 41% of the votes cast. And therefore, that huge percentage of voters are unrepresented. In quantitative terms, 41% of the votes won 100% of representation. The implication, therefore, is that all those who voted for Party B or C might as well have stayed away from the elections, since their votes do not count. This is why the majority rule system is generally criticized for promoting the winner takes all or a zero-sum game syndrome. If you take your time to understand this analysis or this analogy, you would understand that majority rule sometimes does not entirely connote the popular will of the people. Just like this mathematical precision was given, 41%, for example, have taken the day as the majority of the votes cast amounts to 41%, as against the scores from other political parties to be 39 and 29% respectively. But in the general scheme of things, if you look at it closely, in as much as 41% have won, there is a huge margin of 59% left out. And this idea is what sometimes creates the whole feeling of winner takes all or a zero-sum game syndrome, which in a layman's language would be that the ruling party is in charge of the affairs of the country in totality, to the disregard of other players that were involved in the electoral system. So this system has its flaws from this perspective, and the only way to correct it is for us to understand the system and devise a system that reflects or promotes the peculiarity or the nature and character of our own system. And then there's another perspective to this, which is the proportional representation. Under the system of proportional representation, however, elections are not decided at constituency levels. The country as a whole is considered as one single constituency, and various parties present candidates to be seen as the electorates. And voters are expected to choose from those lists. A party will therefore be allotted in parliament as many seats as correspond to the percentage of votes scored in the entire country. The parliament is therefore a reflection of the strength of each party based on the number of votes. Under this variant, government is usually, if not always, by a coalition of several parties. Its major advantage is that it is evidently more just than majority system because it provides room for more parties to participate in government and thus prelude the possibility of instability arising from the injustice because of consistent exclusion of minority parties from government. Its major defect is that it encourages the proliferation of small parties that may eventually win not so significant number of seats in parliament and may make the process of forming a stable government difficult. A case in point is the German 1999 constitution, where not less than 42 parties contested for elections, and in the elections, not more than 14 of those parties managed to win seats in parliament. Also, the Salvador Allende government in 1970 in Chile was a coalition of the major political parties. But when the controversies over redistribution of farmlands and their nationalization assumed irreconcilable level among the coalition partners, the various parties withdrew their support. To avert a deadlock, Allende abandoned all democratic presumptions or pretenses and became dictatorial. The army intervened and he was subsequently murdered in 1973. So if you look at this statement closely, you would understand the departure or the dichotomy that exists between majority rule and this proportional representation. What the argument, the central argument is proportional representation is the fact that all the political parties that are involved in the electoral system or the electoral process are accorded some measure of inclusivity in the entire system as they play roles, certain roles in forming more so like a unitary system of government or a unitary government. And they all, to a large extent, have a voice in the system. It is better than this whole idea of the majority rule where when a political party comes to power, everything is structured from top to bottom in line with the political party's interest and desires to the neglect of other players. But this proportional representation tends to have a way to divide positions across party lines, and the government is formed with the view of other political parties or other players in the system. But there is a major disadvantage in this arrangement. And that is where there is the argument that those smaller parties, because they know that by virtue of being a political party, they will be involved in the system, they might be a little relaxed and not even push properly to win positions because they know that however it is, the system is structured in such a way that they have a role to play in it as well. So that, to a large extent, can trigger the proliferation, that is the establishment or the uncontrollable existence of political parties. Like the Nigerian system, for example, there was a time we had over 83 political parties, and not so many of them could even win a seat. And the INEC delisted so many. And as of today, I think we have up to 18 political parties that have fielded candidates, presidential candidates for the 2023 elections. And we shall see how far that plays out. Some of them are not so popular, but with the recent reforms and other variables that have been injected into our electoral system, there is a tendency that surprises might come in the next election. It will no longer be the usual practice of the big political parties, but smaller parties can equally pull some surprises in the system. So having said that, it is a realization that none of these two variants is perfect that led some scholars to suggest a modification of the two to achieve what is called a mixed system. So this is another variant of the electoral system. that a country can practice, such as the tribe mandate system or the minority quorum system. Whether in a majority rule or proportional system, representation is another complicated subject in democratic government. The complication arose from what should be the criterion or basis of representation, an issue on which opinion is divided among scholars. Population, territorial, and functional criteria are either used selectively or in combination. In Nigeria and USA, both population and territorial criteria are employed in the elections of the two chambers of the National Assembly and the Congress, respectively. In the former Soviet Union, the functional criterion was added in the election to the 2,250 strong Congress of the People's Deputies on whether public officials should represent national or constituency interests. There is also no unanimity among scholars on whether public officials should represent the people's will or their interest, technically known as the mandate or independent theory of representation. While Thomas Hobbes and Alexander Hamilton preferred the reactionary theory, John Locke and Thomas Jefferson favored the liberal theory, and Ginger Rousseau endorsed the radical theory of representation. So in between, or a point of synergy between the majority rule and the proportional representation, is this mixed system that we have just explained, where some attributes of the majority rule is merged with the proportional representative arrangement, and a government is formed. And we have given examples of the practice in Nigeria and USA, and even in the Soviet Union, where the system tends to deploy measures to cover all gamut of opinions within the system as it pertains to the choice of leadership. So having discussed that, we shall be looking at major landmarks that have taken place in our electoral system. And these are the issues of reforms. They have taken place, or they have laid the foundation for the growth of democracy and the practice of democracy, and even party politics as it is known. So one of those that we have x-rayed and have examined to be a major function, and have laid a major groundwork of foundation for democracy to thrive, is the Ways Commission. The commission brought in a lot of reform agendas that to a large extent encouraged or assisted the conduct of the 2015 elections, and some of its recommendations are still relevant in our today's electoral system and the reforms that have taken place in the preparation towards the 2023 elections. So having said that, there is the need for us now to look at the electoral reforms that has been a recurring staple or element of the country's democratic process. Ways Electoral Reforms Committee recommendations, in view of the far-reaching recommendations of the committee, has it that it is imperative that we examine in greater details the committee's understanding of Nigeria's electoral problems and how it proposed that they could be addressed. In carrying out its assignment, the committee reviewed the country's electoral history and established that the lack of independence by the Electoral Commission at both federal and state levels is a key deficiency of Nigeria's electoral process. In the committee's review of 91 years history of elections in Nigeria since 1922, it observed a progressive degeneration of outcomes, with elections that were conducted, including the 2007 2011 elections, believed to be the worst election so far. Hence, the panel in its report affirmed further that the major problem with the nation's electoral system is the lack of credible elections. The committee noted that the perception of the people about elections are part of the critical elements that determine the success of electoral practices, and regretted that the election mindset of Nigerians is not only largely negative, they are also largely irrational. The committee's recommendations are therefore aimed at achieving the desired positive mindset in the electorate, so as to minimize violence and rigging in elections, including building lasting democratic institutions and cultures. Mohammed Uwais, a former Chief Justice of Nigeria, who headed a 22-member committee, noted the committee is firmly convinced that the acceptance and implementation of the recommendations contained in this report will significantly restore confidence in the electoral process and usher in an era of free, fair, and credible elections in the country. So, having studied the general challenges that Nigeria as a country has faced in its electoral system, ranging from the issues of violence during elections, the snatching of ballot boxes, and other irregularities or sharp practices that take place within the system, they came up with far-reaching reforms, ranging from reforms in the process in itself, in the system in itself, and even in the outcome of it. Like the arrangement that used to be from where you have agents being registered or even votes being collected manually and all that, they saw as one of the catalysts or as major catalysts to the irregularities that are inherent in the system. And hence they came up with recommendations and reforms that should take place to better the lots of election in Nigeria. Some of the committee's recommendations require changes in existing electoral procedures, reallocation of electoral functions, or creation of new institutions. Some of them require new legislations, while others require amendments of existing laws, leaving nothing to chance to quickening the implementation process. The committee prepared draft of 3 bills: Act to amend 1999 Constitution, Act to amend 2006 Electoral Act, and Act to establish Electoral Offences Commission. So you can see that they were specific about the areas that needed amendments or adjustments to fit into the requirements of the system and to accord it some measure of legitimacy and acceptability by the majority of the people. Hence, we shall be looking at the highlights of the panel's recommendation. First is that a genuine independent National Electoral Commission be instituted. The committee recommends that the Independent National Electoral Commission should be massively reorganized and repositioned to ensure its independence and professionalism. It therefore recommends that the 1999 Constitution be amended to ensure that INEC becomes truly independent, non-partisan, impartial, professional, transparent, and reliable as an institution and in the performance of its constitutional function. More like the INEC should be independent of the executive and the legislature. As such, they will be able to perform their duties effectively. For INEC to be truly independent, he recommended that Section 84 of the 1999 Constitution be amended by adding subsection 8 to read: the election expenditure of the Independent Electoral Commission offices, addition to salaries and allowances of the chairman and members, shall be first charged the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation. This was contained in Intel magazine of 2009. The committee also recommends that INEC be split into 2 bodies: a board that formulates broad electoral policy and direction, and a professional technical election management agency to handle the actual conduct of elections. The INEC board shall be composed of 13 members as follows: a chairman, a deputy chairman who must not be the same gender, 6 persons representing the 6 geopolitical zones of the country, 2 of whom must be female, and 5 nominees represent the civil service organization, labor organizations, the Nigerian Bar Association, women organization, and the media. Once appointed, a nominee cannot be recalled by any organization. The chairman and deputy shall be persons of integrity, non-partisan, possess vast professional, administrative, and academic experience, and must not be less than 50 years old. The other 11 members shall also have the same qualification, but must not be less than 40 years of age. The nomination process, as suggested, is to be no less rigorous for the position of chairman and the 6 geopolitical zones. The National Justice Council shall advertise all the positions, receive applications to nomination from the general public, and shortlist 3 persons for each position. So if you look at the Ways reports, they have all this embedded in it, and that this will have a far-reaching significance in the turnout of elections if implemented in Nigeria. And the good news is that to a large extent, so many of the issues raised here have been followed even to recent times, and you would understand and you would have observed that the system of elections in Nigeria has greatly improved, even though there is still much to be desired. But like I have said in the previous class, a test or an experimental board that would happen with our electoral system would be the 2023 elections. And from there, we would know if these far-reaching recommendations by the Ways Commission and other commissions that have been set up uh, since the practice of our democracy in 1999 to date has actually had have actually met the objective for which they were carried out. And there are other issues that were raised also, which one of such is unbundling of Independent National Electoral Commission. One of the most radical thoughts, though contentious position by this Ways Commission, is how it suggested that the INEC be unbundled. That is, the powers of the INEC or the complexity of the INEC be reduced to a sizable position or posture where other arms of the INEC can play the role that the INEC is playing now. And that is the whole idea of unbundling the system. The committee stated that for INEC to function efficiently, some of the functions it presently performs should be assigned to other agencies. Consequently, it recommended the creation of 3 new agencies. These are Political Parties Registration Council, the Electoral Offences Commission, and the Constituency Delimitation Commission. The Political Parties Registration Council would, among other things, register political parties in accordance and operation of the political parties, including their finances. It shall be made up of a chairman and deputy who must be of different gender and 6 national commissioners representing the 6 geopolitical zones, 2 of whom must be women. The procedure of appointment and tenure are the same as that of the INEC board and the technical management team. This is all embedded within the confines of unbundling the functions of the INEC. Members can be removed by the president or the recommendation of the NJC. A new autonomous constitutionally recognized body called the Electoral Offences Commission has been recommended to be established through a bill of the National Assembly and empowered to perform functions which mitigation of all electoral fraud and offences, coordination, enforcement and prosecution of offences, and the enforcement of the Electoral Act 2006, the constitution of registered political parties, and any other act of enactment, as the case may be, will be handled by this body. It shall be the chief executive officer as the head of this particular body that they have come up to suggest, as the Electoral Offences Commission, that the act shall, as the head of the organization, shall be appointed by the NJC or by the recommendation of the president. The Attorney General of the Federation or his nominee, not below the rank of Assistant Inspector General, and his secretary, who shall be the head of administration, will also play active role within this commission. The chairman and members shall be non-partisan and appointed by the president, subject to the confirmation of the Senate. The third agency is the Constituency Delimitation Commission. This will be established with institutional representation from INEC, the National Populations Commission, the National Boundary Commission, Office of the Surveyor General of the Federation, the National Bureau of Statistics, and the National Identity Management Commission. A 4th body, Center for Democratic Studies, is recommended to be established to undertake broad civic education for legislators, political office holders, security agencies, politicians, political parties, and the general public. So in their own wisdom, they recommended that other agencies be created out of the INEC to ease the functioning of the INEC and to ensure inclusivity of all and sundry in the system, both from the political class to the general public or to the electorates and other election stakeholders in the system. And that, to a large extent, is one of the recommendations from the OIS panel. There's also the issue of scrapping of state independent national electoral commissions, which as one of the tenets of the reform, of the ways reform, that states should no longer have a independent national electoral commission, but that there should be a central body for that. Although it is not the practice as of today, but because if you check very well and you understand the practice of politics in Nigeria, you would see that governors, to a large extent, are the ones now controlling the state independent electoral commissions to their whims and caprices. And that, to a large extent, is an indication of what this committee recommended. The committee recommends that the State Independent Electoral Commission, (SIEC), should be reorganized and structured into INEC to form a single election management body for the country. At the state level, INEC will have 37 directors, one for each of the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, appointed by INEC, and to be trained and posted to states other than their states of origin. At the local government level, INEC shall employ 774 full-time electoral officers after public advertisement and post them outside their local government areas. At least 1/3 of the number shall be women. Similarly, full-time career assistant electoral officers should be employed by INEC by the same process and posted within their ward to give this a legal backing. Section 153 of the 1999 Constitution, which lists INEC as a federal executive body, would be amended by deleting subsection 1(1)(f). Consequently, INEC should be deleted anywhere it appears in section 153 to 158. What this is saying is that the State Independent Electoral Commission should, as a matter of fact, be reorganized to reflect this structure that the Ways report came up with. That when INEC directors are recruited across the 36 states and the FCT, they be reshuffled so that, for example, an INEC director or commissioner, as the case may be, employed to represent Benue should come from perhaps Akwa Ibom State or some other places where they cannot be compromised or be narrowed. Their roles cannot be narrowed to the dictates of the executive of the state. And even from the local governments too, that they be recruited and posted to different local governments as a way of reshuffling the system to ensure that there is no abuse of the system. Because if you employ people that have similar idea or that understand the system or the demography of the environment, there is every tendency for abuses. The reform also made other recommendations ranging from voting processes. And we they say that on the voting process and procedure, the committee recommends the gradual introduction of electronic machines in future elections after a period of limited testing and experimentation. In future elections, accreditation and voting are to take place within a defined period. Agents of political parties are to be given copies of results, and they have the right to demand a recount on the spot should the need arise. This is the reason, the major reason why this Ways report reform is examined today. We had a brief understanding of the Ways report from one of the previous classes, but there's the need to shed some light on the 2023 elections, having its origin or having its history in, that's the reforms that have taken place so far, in having its history in the Ways report. Why did I say this? It's simply because the 2023 election has assumed a posture for automation. But this idea came from the Ways Reforms Committee. They came up with the idea that the whole processes of the electoral system should be automated, as that to a large extent would check the excesses of politicians and the abuses that are inherent in the system, where some politicians have been beneficiaries of the flawed system. But when it is automated, something that everybody can track and understand, even from the polling unit to the world, to the state level, to the INEC itself, there is a uniformity in the results presented, because as the votes are cast, they are electronically transmitted to the INEC portal. And anything contrary to that might not hold sway in the event that there is a discrepancy in the votes from the polling units and what is contained in the INEC portal. So this landmark reform in our electoral system had its origin from the Uwais report. Hence, the relevance of that recommendation, reform commission, reform panel or committee cannot be overstated. All election results duly signed and copies given to the party agents, the police and the state security service should be announced at the polling stations by the presiding officers. INEC is expected swiftly and publicly to display detailed results of the elections, including all polling station results and collected information on the number of voters, votes cast, invalid votes, and others. Emphasis is on the transparency of the result process to assure all stakeholders that the election is free, fair, and credible. To enhance this, results broken down at polling stations should be provided at each superior level, and the results should be more comprehensive in details. For the presidential election, INEC is to publish the results down to the lowest level prior to declare a winner, to demonstrate that the results are accurate and within expectations. The committee says that this is very important because without vote analysis, at least at the state level, it would be impossible to determine if all constitutional requirements for the elections have been met. The truth is that the system has even gone beyond this recommendation to automate the entire process, and we shall be seeing it, although it has been practiced in a few states, but we shall be seeing it in its entirety in the 2023 elections. And at that level, we shall be able to either applaud the system or still point out the flaws within the system. So the other issues that were raised in this Waste Reforms Commission or committee is that party agents be accredited some days, or in fact, by the recommendation, 14 days to the elections, unlike the one that is done where the agents are accredited on the day of the election. The committee recommended that the agents be known and accredited at least 14 days before the election. But there were fears expressed under this arrangement that given such a long space, it may be easy for candidates, for party agents to be switched. The real identities of the non-aligned ones and can expose them to danger or business deals to rig elections. In other words, when you give such a long period of time for the system to recognize party agents, there is the room that they can be changed, they can be twisted into doing some practices that might not be in tandem with the acceptable standard of the system. Other aspects of the reforms that you should look at yourself includes independent candidacy, and they said that a novel introduction in the recommendation for independent candidates, if accepted, some credible persons will be allowed to contest the election provided they meet two conditions. In addition to the provision of 2006 electoral law, it shall be constituency-backed nomination by verifiable signature of 10 registered voters in each ward of the constituency, and on the payment of a financial deposit, which is refundable if the candidate scores up to 10% of the valid votes cast in the constituency. Like there's a room for candidates to come on an independent basis, not through the instrumentality of political parties, but they can stand for elections on their own if they meet the criteria that the criterion that have been stated by the committee, which includes that 10 registered voters must nominate such a person, but such a person can stand for to be elected or to run for a public office. Other significant aspects of this committee includes funding of political parties. and then the encouragement of a mixed system. Remember when we started this lecture, we talked about the majority system, and that a synergy of the two bets the mixed electoral system. And that this reform, by ways, recommended that this system, the mixed system practice. The committee recommends a mixed electoral system, which is a combination of the majority rule system or first past the post system and modified proportional representation for legislative elections at the federal, state, and local government levels, except the Senate. For the House of Representatives, in the existing 360 constituencies would be filled by the first past the post system, while for the Senate, the committee recommends a mixed electoral system for the 108 seats. This will be replicated at the state and local government levels. Another aspect of their recommendation is that disposal of electoral petitions, like all petitions, be concluded even before winners are announced or emerge. The election will therefore be conducted 6 months ahead of handing over. So in this aspect, all disputes must be resolved, and then there is a clear direction before the system takes off. Then there's the rejection of zero-sum politics, which is a very important aspect of this committee. The recommendation, remember we talked about under the majority rule, that the winner takes all, or more like a zero-sum game arrangement, where the majority party or the party that have been declared the winner of the election considers the system as its prerogative or something attached to the system, and they decide on all the positions and everything that happens in the system. Take, for example, the APC government of today. Other political parties play active roles or have public offices from members of other political parties. It is the idea that this statement is trying to counter, that other political parties should be allowed to participate in the system and play active roles in the system. As such, there is inclusivity of all and sundry. So this idea has it that furthermore, the committee rejects that if just what it calls a zero-sum approach to politics, more popularly known as winner takes all. Henceforth, political parties that win at least 2.5% of the assembly seats shall be qualified. That view of the committee that helps electorally influential politicians to embrace the attitude of joining any government in power. Having or being a part of any government in power has been experienced a lot in Nigeria, and we continue to experience it, where you see politicians today are in PDP, tomorrow they are in APC. The same people in APC today can switch to PDP or Labour Party or African Democratic Congress tomorrow. If, for example, the African Democratic Congress wins the next election now, you would find that those that are in other positions in the PDP today and in the APC today, singing praises of the APC, would now switch easily, or because of their selfish interests, move from one party to the other. So what this is saying is that if there is the practice that all political parties, or at least the ones that have won certain positions, are giving chances in the cabinet to be part of the cabinet or to have their candidates as part of the cabinet, there would be the tendency that it would first of all mitigate this whole idea of being in every government in power, and it will also ensure that people stand on a particular ideological lining, and such is the beauty of democracy, and to a large extent would ensure effective participation of all in the system. So, having said all that, we have come to the end of this class. And one of the self-assessment exercises that you should look at is that you should explain the most important recommendation of the Mohammed Owais panel on electoral reforms. In summary, in this unit, we highlighted the major recommendation of the Mohammed Ways panel on electoral reforms and stressed why it is important for the history of reforms in Nigeria. This, in our view, is one of the major steps towards conduct of credible elections in the country. In conclusion, we believe the Mohammed Ways panel on electoral reforms did justice to the reforms we have seen in our electoral system today, particularly as it concerns the automation of the forthcoming 2023 general elections, though it laid the foundation for the pre-2015 general elections reforms. But this impact will best be felt in the next year's general election. So, having said that, we have come to the end of this lecture. And like I said earlier on, do well to reach me if you have questions, and do well to visit the school's portal or the site and listen to these lectures and read through the materials here provided. So we'll have our next session on Tuesday by this time, 2 to 3 o'clock. So I urge you to inform other members of the class. So thank you, and till we meet again, believing that our subsequent classes would have a reflection of the class as it should be. So, thank you.